We got no Republicans.
Got Helen. Your switch is what took.
On this vote, the yeas are 55, the nays are 45. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President, I enter a motion to reconsider the vote by which cloture was not invoked on S. 1845.
The motion is entered.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I appreciate very much my colleague, junior senator from Nevada, voting with us on this, voting with himself. He's a co-sponsor of this. He and Jack Reed have done admirably good work for the Senate and for the country. Everyone should notice on the first matter we tried to invoke cloture on. I did not move to a motion to reconsider. I did on this one. This is a 3-month unpaid for. I would hope we could get that passed sometime. If we can't, there's still an effort to, I'm sure out there someplace, that we could find a way to work together to get these people the desperate help they need. So that's why I did this, leaving the door open for us to work together to try to come up with something.
Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to express my extreme disappointment that we have blocked the Senate from moving forward on this critical legislation. There are 1.5 million Americans who have lost their unemployment insurance since December 28th. Every week, 70,000 more lose that protection. So my disappointment is severe, but their situation is much more desperate. And we had, within our power today, the ability to move this Senate forward to help our people, to help people who only qualify for the program because they worked and because they're still looking for work in one of the most difficult job markets we've seen in many, many decades. It is extremely urgent that we act, and today we failed to act. We have to continue to move forward. The Majority Leader has procedurally put us in a position so that we can call this measure up again very quickly. We have to continue to work towards a solution. We have to keep the economy moving forward and creating jobs. And that was what this was about, giving people some modest payment each week, but also, as the CBO estimated, this measure, if extended for the full year, would generate 200,000 additional jobs. That is on average what we have been creating each month. In fact, I will remind my colleagues, last year's unemployment insurance benefits were unpaid for, and they generated additional jobs, not only providing benefits to people who needed it, who were searching for work, but increased economic activity in the country and put people to work. And I hope my colleagues recognize that this legislation that they filibustered today was the result of significant concessions to many of my Republican colleagues. I work closely with my Republican colleagues. We worked for a way through this thicket so that we could help Americans who have earned that help. And I think it's important to make clear how we moved to try to accommodate the major objections and considerations of my colleagues on the other side. We first proposed, and I proposed this as emergency spending, unpaid for. And we received from the other side a, no, we can't accept that. It has to be paid for. And we went ahead and in the first provision we voted on today, we paid for it. And we also responded to another significant concern, that we not use tax revenues to pay for it. So we avoided tax revenues. And next, we went ahead and we adopted a provision to pay for it, to provide for many months, I think 11.5 months of benefits, paid for without using revenues. And let me also note that this is the exception to the rule. The White House, in some of their materials, has noted that 14 of the last 17 times in 20 years that it's been extended, UI, there's been no strings attached, no pay-fors, emergency spending. But yet we listen to the thoughtful comments of our colleagues, we worked together closely with them, and we came up with a way to pay for this extension for 11.5 months and not to use tax revenues, even though many on our side, in fact, I would be among them, that would say there are egregious loopholes that should be closed regardless of what the revenue is used for, but could be used to fund these benefits. And then we've had this procedural back and forth. But today, Leader Reid offered a series of amendments to the other side, and they objected to those amendments. So let me reiterate, we have tried, not only in very good faith, but very diligently over the last several days particularly, to try to bring something to this floor that could get the 60 votes necessary to help these struggling Americans. We've incorporated, in fact, in our pay-for one of the provisions that Senator Portman suggested with respect to disability payments, which was controversial in some respects, but it was, again, another attempt to try to look at what my colleagues on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side were talking about in terms of how we would responsibly pay for this measure. We've been debating this extension since December. It's time to act, and regrettably we did not act today. We've made concessions to try to move forward. This was not a take it or leave it. It's been unpaid for 17 times before. It's going to be 18 times now. You've got to do this, etc. And yet, still, we cannot tell people who are in very extreme economic situations, who are depending upon this modest $300 a week to help them pay the rent, pay the mortgage, put fuel in the car, have a cell phone so they could look for work, get to a job interview, telling them no. You're still out in the cold, literally. And it's pretty cold in many parts of the country. So, Mr. President, we can't give up. We're not going to give up. I'm very encouraged that talking to some of my colleagues on the Republican side, they still want to work through with us. We'll accept that opportunity to work together. But let's just remember what is a disappointing moment today for many of us is a dispiriting moment for millions of Americans who do not have the modest support that unemployment insurance would provide. We've got to work for them, and we've got to work for our economy, and we can do both, and in the weeks ahead, the days ahead, we'll continue to do that. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. As we just heard, the Senate continues to discuss and consider an extension of unemployment benefits. Many Americans certainly do continue to struggle to find work in today's economy. And while assistance to those who are without work serves an important purpose in helping Americans transition, I'm fearful that we are failing, in fact, I know we are failing to address the underlying and important root cause of that unemployment. And that is, how do we as Americans grow our economy and create jobs for the citizens of our country? A growing economy creates new opportunities for Americans to find meaningful work. And with meaningful work comes the opportunity for Americans to improve their economic security and advance up the economic ladder. Senator Wyden and I have started in 2012 an economic mobility caucus that met today for the 5th time, exploring ways that we can work together to create the opportunity for every American to work their way up, have a better life, more future, a greater future, more success, better financial stability. But unfortunately, again, at the moment, in my view, lack of leadership and partisan politics has prevented action on measures that could provide immediate boost to the economy at little or no cost to the American taxpayer. Data from the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City makes clear that most new jobs come from the young companies created by entrepreneurs. In fact, since 1980, nearly all of the net new jobs that have been created by companies less than 5 years old. These new businesses create an average of 3 million jobs each year. As of December, there were approximately 20.6 million Americans who are unemployed, want to work, but have stopped searching for a job, or are working part-time because they can't find full-time employment. So when we talk about the unemployment rate, it masks the true story. People who've given up looking for a job, as well as those who have a part-time job and need and desire a full-time job. And the labor force participation rate has reached the lowest level in 35 years. At a time when just 62% of working-age Americans are employed, it is clear we need an economic boost powered by entrepreneurship. To jumpstart the economy and create jobs for Americans, we put together and I authored bipartisan legislation called Startup 3.0. The Senate Majority Leader is often talking about the need for allowing votes on legislation that has bipartisan support, and this is a perfect example of such a bill that ought to be considered by the United States Senate. Working with Senator Warner, he's my primary co-sponsor of this bill, but Senator Coons, Kaine, and Klobuchar, as well as Republican Senators Blunt and Rubio, we introduced common sense legislation that addresses 4 key factors that influence an entrepreneur's chance for success: taxes, regulations, innovation, and access to talent. It's become all too common here that we're denied the opportunity to have a vote on things that many of us find common agreement on, and Startup 3.0 is one of those. In fact, I offered, along with Senator Warner, this Startup 3.0 as an amendment to the unemployment insurance extension bill. Startup 3.0 makes common sense changes to the tax code to encourage investment in startups and reward patient capital. To address the burdensome government regulations, the legislation requires federal agencies to determine whether the cost of new regulations outweigh the benefits, and encourages federal agencies to give special consideration to the impact of proposed regulations that they would have upon those startup businesses. As any entrepreneur knows, a good idea is essential to starting a successful business. And to get more good ideas out of the laboratory and into the market, this legislation improves the process for commercializing federally funded research so that taxpayer-funded innovation can come and can be turned into companies and spur economic growth and job creation. And finally, Startup 3.0 provides new opportunities for highly educated and entrepreneurial immigrants to stay in the United States. They're here legally now, but are often told they need to return home to pursue their careers, when we know their talent and their new ideas could fuel economic growth and create American jobs. While there is meaningful disagreement, we have plenty of disagreement about the immigration issue. There are aspects of immigration in which there is broad agreement. One of the areas of agreement is highly skilled immigration. Highly skilled immigrants not only provide the talent for growing companies needed to fuel further economic growth and job creation, but those individuals tend to be very entrepreneurial. Immigrants are now more than twice as likely as native-born Americans to start a business. And in 2011, immigrants were responsible for more than 1 in every 4 U.S. businesses founded. In addition, immigrants are responsible for significant contributions to innovation. According to a recent study by the Partnership for a New American Economy, 76% of patents at the top 10 patent-producing U.S. universities had at least one foreign-born inventor. One of the best things we can do for the American economy is to welcome highly skilled and entrepreneurial immigrants. No matter what Congress does, these individuals will continue to innovate and create jobs. The question is, where will they innovate and where will the jobs be created? And if Congress makes the right choice, those jobs and that innovation will occur in the United States of America and build the United States economy and employ United States citizens. Unfortunately, there are too many people here in the Senate, in the Congress, in Washington, D.C., who say we can't do anything unless we do everything. And that has prevented the passage of targeted immigration legislation that would boost the economic growth and create American jobs. That same attitude prevents us from doing many things on the Senate floor, and it's well past time that we found ways to do the things we can agree upon not waiting for the opportunity to do everything. Let's do the things we can while we wait and work on the chance to do bigger and broader things. Our STEM visas that we talk about that seem so important to our economy, American businesses are projected to need an estimated 800,000 workers with advanced STEM degrees by 2018, but will only find 550,000 American graduates with an advanced STEM education. We must do more as a nation. We absolutely must do more to prepare Americans for careers in STEM fields so that our country no longer has to rely upon talented foreign labor. But in the short term, as we work to equip Americans with the skills for the 21st century economy, we need to create a pathway for highly educated foreign-born students who are here in the United States legally going to school to stay in America, where their ideas and talents can fuel great American economic growth. Startup 3.0 creates visas for foreign students who graduate from an American university with a master's or PhD in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. These skilled workers would be granted conditional status contingent upon them filling a needed gap in the U.S. workforce. It may seem counterintuitive that by allowing highly skilled immigrants to work in the United States, more Americans will find work, but that's exactly what will happen. A study by the Partnership for New American Economy again and the American Enterprise Institute found that every immigrant with a graduate degree in the United States from a U.S. university working in a STEM field creates 2.62 subsequent American jobs. If American companies are unable to find and hire the qualified, talented workers they need, those businesses will open locations overseas, and I've seen examples of that too many times. When this happens, not only are those specific jobs gone, they're lost, but also the many supporting jobs and economic activity associated with them no longer are here either. And even more frustrating is, to me, is that when these highly skilled workers who are now employed in some other country, they're entrepreneurs too. They will have an idea and they will found and start a business that may grow and create more jobs, but because they couldn't find employment here because they lacked the necessary visa, they've moved to another country. They use their entrepreneurial skills and talent. They create the jobs, they create the company elsewhere, and the jobs that we need in this country are then outside the United States. This legislation also allows for an entrepreneur's visa. Immigrants to the United States have a long history of creating businesses in America. Today, 1 in every 10 Americans employed at a privately owned U.S. company works in an immigrant-owned firm. Of the current Fortune 500 companies, more than 40% were founded by a first or second generation American. So my question to my colleagues is, why would we want to leave an immigration system in place that discourages entrepreneurs from coming to our country, investing their own money, and creating jobs here, strengthening our economy? I think we should do exactly the opposite and welcome those people who want to create jobs for Americans in America. Startup 3.0 creates an entrepreneur's visa for foreign-born entrepreneurs currently in the United States legally. Those individuals with a good idea, with capital and a willingness to hire American workers would be able to stay in the United States and grow their businesses here. Each immigrant entrepreneur would be required to create jobs for Americans. If the business is not successful and jobs are not created, the immigrant would have to go back to his or her home country. Using conservative estimates, the Kauffman Foundation predicts that an entrepreneur's visa would generate 500,000 to 1.6 million jobs in the next 10 years. These are real jobs with real economic impact that could boost GDP estimated by more than 1.5%. And these are jobs for Americans desperately seeking to work here and to support their families and to follow their dreams. As the Senate considers extending unemployment insurance in the short term, we must not lose sight of the long-term goal. It ought to be the short-term, the intermediate, and the long-term goal of creating an environment for jobs in America. And there is no better way to create jobs than to support entrepreneurs and to foster the development of new businesses, which are responsible for all those net new jobs in the economy. Numerous studies demonstrate a smarter, more strategic immigration policy that supports entrepreneurs and skilled immigrants can grow the economy and help put Americans back to work. Jobless Americans and U.S. businesses searching for talent that they need to expand and create jobs can no longer afford to let the all-or-nothing approach to immigration legislation hold economic growth and opportunity hostage. It has prevented progress on important challenges facing our country for far too long. A far better approach would be to pass the things we can agree upon now and keep working to find agreement on the issues that divide us. First on this list should be the measures outlined in Startup Act 3.0. Other countries are realizing the value of highly educated and entrepreneurial individuals in starting businesses, and they're changing their laws to welcome them. The United States cannot afford to turn a blind eye to global competition. If we fail to act, we risk losing the next generation of great entrepreneurs, and the jobs that they will create will be in foreign countries, not in the United States. And we risk continuing another month in which 20.6 million Americans remain without meaningful work. Work is an ennobling feature of life. Jobs matter. And this Congress and this President have failed, in my view, miserably to do one of our primary responsibilities, to create an environment in which Americans can find work and can pursue that American dream, putting food on their family's table, saving for their kids' education, and making sure that they have a secure retirement in the future, and knowing every day that when they get up and go to work, they're doing something good for themselves, for their families, and their country. Mr. President, we desperately need to work together to create an environment in which American jobs are created. No one I know really wants to be recipient of an unemployment check. It may be necessary, but it's not their goal. The goal is to find an ennobling, meaningful job that supports them and their family. I thank the President for his indulgence.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I think it's wonderful to hear Republican Senator Moran talk about job creation. It's really music to my ears, especially when he talks about the importance of addressing the issue of immigration, which clearly needs to be addressed and is clearly a job creation issue. That's why I've been hoping that Speaker Boehner would take up the Senate's immigration bill, which is comprehensive, and as the President said, President Obama, if you can't do that, bring up a series of bills and let's get moving. Believe me, I've seen every report there is, and Senator Moran is right. Immigration reform is necessary for us. It's an economic issue. It would be an economic boon to our country in terms of jobs and GDP. I also think it very important that we not turn our back on an American value that we've had in this country since the 50s, in which Republicans and Democrats in the Congress and Republicans and Democrats in the White House have agreed that when there is a great recession and people are out of work, that they need to have unemployment compensation, which is an insurance program to keep them from falling apart. This is an American value. We talk about bipartisanship, and sometimes we just can't seem to get there. But I have looked back since the 50s. Mr. President, 2/3 of the time we passed an extension of unemployment compensation, many times to help people you work so hard to represent, the mine workers and others who were hit with hard times. And we've done it in a bipartisan way 2/3 of the time with no pay for. Since 1958, 2/3 of the time we extended it with no pay for. Under George W. Bush, we extended unemployment compensation, the extended unemployment compensation paid for by the federal government 5 times with no pay for, because it was an emergency. And even though in those days deficits were raging, here we've cut the deficit in half. We don't like that. We want to cut it more. I want to see it in balance. We surely should do what we just tried to do, Mr. President, extend unemployment compensation for a long period of time with a pay for, which is what we tried to do, a short period of time without a pay for, and help people keep their lives together. So we've had this American value since the 50s. And for the first time that I can tell, we had one party, with the exception of one person, vote lockstep against extending unemployment compensation to hard-working Americans who are looking for work every week, every day. and I have their stories, I'm going to put them in the record. They turned their backs on 1.5 million Americans. In my state, 250,000 people. Now, here's the thing, and I don't like to come and make these speeches, but the facts speak for themselves. Leader Reid, the majority leader, just offered a very important deal in broad daylight to the Republicans, and I'm going to make a parliamentary inquiry, if I might, Mr. President.
Objection.
Here it is. Is it true that Majority Leader Reid offered the Republicans 5 related amendments to the unemployment compensation bill, those amendments to be of their own choosing? Is that correct?
You are correct.
Is it further true that he offered Democrats 5 related amendments of their own choosing?
That's correct.
Is it further correct that he also said that each side could offer an additional 5 amendments as side-by-sides if they wanted to, of their own choosing? Is that correct?
Senator is correct.
Is it also true he offered time agreements of an hour per amendment and then to be followed by passage of the bill?
Senator is correct.
Okay. The reason I wanted to put this in the record in a simple way is because sometimes when we have the back and forth and I object and reserving the right to, people lose track of exactly what happened. We offered the Republicans everything they said they wanted. They wanted amendments. Mr. President, they were offered amendments of their own choosing. Up to 20 amendments could have been voted on under the agreement. They said they wanted pay-fors. We gave them a pay-for that actually came out of Paul Ryan's budget, a structural change that would have paid for 10.5 months of unemployment benefits. They can't say yes. They demanded amendments. We gave them amendments. They demanded pay-fors. We gave them pay-fors. Now, I have to say, something else is going on. And I have to say what I think is going on. They don't want to extend unemployment compensation to the long-term unemployed. And, Mr. President, that is a dramatic change that is occurring in the culture of this country, in the compassion of this country, in the consensus in this country, in the values of this country. 1.5 million Americans now, 250,000 Californians. I am frankly stunned. I know Senator Mikulski is here, and I so much want to hear from her, so I'll skip some of the other history about how it's been over the years and how we've done this and we've come together. Republicans, Democrats, we extended unemployment compensation benefits more times under Republican presidents than under Democratic presidents. And Democrats didn't stand there and say, gee, there's a Republican in the White House and maybe this will help him look good, or maybe this will add 0.2% to the GDP. Maybe we better say no. No, we said yes. Because we're a party that believes that people need to keep hearth and home together. The long-term unemployment rate is twice as high as it was at any other time that these extended benefits were allowed to expire. There are 3 unemployed people for every job opening nationwide. So I'm going to close with a few little stories from my constituents, because you got to hear the voice of the people. In this Senate, we should be representing the middle class and the working poor of this country. We should be fighting for them, because guess what? Everyone else benefits. The billionaires and millionaires, they're doing fine. They do better when we have a strong middle class. Madam President, you are a fighter for economic justice, and I know this statistic is something you've probably used many times. But the fact is that 450 families are worth more than 150 million Americans. Now, I can guarantee you those 450 families, they're just fine. And their children and their grandchildren and their children's children's children. And good for them. Fine. But what about the people who are now cut off at the knees because they're not getting $300 a week to live? Here's one of them. One woman wrote to me, "I'm 58 years old and receiving unemployment benefits for the first time in my life. I am currently receiving my first federal extension," which, by the way, she's now been cut off from. "I was laid off because the nonprofit I was working for lost a major portion of its state funding. Getting unemployment benefits is not preventing me from looking for work. In fact, people getting extended unemployment benefits are required to prove that they're looking for work." She says, "I spend hours filling out applications and posting my resume without results." And then she says to me, "How am I and thousands like me supposed to pay rent and eat? I want Washington to focus on job creation, but that's got to be in addition to, not instead of extending my benefits. I beg you," she says, "I beg you, please extend my unemployment compensation." And then there's Caitlin Smith of 29 Palms. She lost her benefit when the federal extension expired. A Marine Corps veteran, the mother of two. She says work is hard to come by. They can't move because her husband, a vet of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, must remain near the combat center until he's discharged in July. Listen to this. "I have to keep the house at 55 degrees even though I have two little girls, aged 2.5 and 1.5. That's what she told the LA Times in December. How do my Republican friends, except for the one who voted with us at the end of the day, look themselves in the mirror and think about this courageous woman whose family put their life on the line for the country and who's freezing in her home because they're playing parliamentary games on process? And last, Cindy Snow of Beaumont. Why are they using, meaning politicians, why are they using us as pawns? They're playing games with people's lives, she said, referring to politicians in Washington, and that appeared in Bloomberg News. And I ask unanimous consent to put the rest of the stories into the record.
Without objection.
So I'm going to say this. There's a lot of games played around here, and sometimes it's time to call the bluff of the people who are playing cruel games. And Leader Reid called the bluff of my friends on the other side. And he said, "You want amendments? You got them. You want to pay for this extension? We've done it." And what did they do? They walked away. And who's suffering? People like the people I just told you about. Ordinary folks who want nothing more than to get a decent job, who are caught in a situation where we're recovering from the worst recession since the Great Depression. And this is what we give them. A bunch of gobbledygook about, "I wanted more of my amendments so I can be proud and offer amendments." There is a time and a place for filibusters, even though they do far too many. There's a time and a place to argue about process. This is not the time, this is not the place, and this is wrong. And I applaud Leader Reid for his leadership. I applaud Jack Reed for his leadership. And before Senator Mikulski takes the microphone, I just want to thank her publicly. What a hard job she had to sit down and negotiate an appropriations bill, an omnibus bill, that covers everything we do. It was so hard, but she did it in the right spirit of bipartisanship, So did her colleague, who she dealt with and had to deal with, Congressman Rogers. And as a result of that, we're going to do something good here and give stability to the American people. Why can't that same spirit of cooperation take over when we have offered the Republicans everything they wanted in order to get them to vote for unemployment compensation? I'm distressed about it, and we will keep fighting on this issue. I thank you, and I yield the floor.
Madam President, Senator from Maryland. Madam President, I rise today to speak on the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, but before I make those comments, I want to associate myself with remarks of the gentlelady from California, Ms. Boxer, and also the gentleman from Rhode Island, Senator Jack Reed, and also all of those who voted to move forward where we continue to provide an economic social safety net for those people who have lost their job and are actively looking for work, and to continue this economic and social contract that's been part of the way Americans respond to help other Americans at a time when they're down, but they shouldn't feel like they're out. And I would hope that we could put party rancor aside, that we would look at common sense ways to move this bill forward. In terms of the so-called pay-fors, I've been here a long time. I've never seen this pay-for before on unemployment compensation, particularly for a 90-day bill. We're talking about 90 days, and we're already in the middle of January. So I hope the two leaders can come together and that we can resolve this. But on another topic, I want to report to the Senate some very good news. I rise today as the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and I wish to announce that the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014 has completed all of its work in the committee process. We have completed our conference, and it has been filed in the House and should be considered in the House and Senate this week. What does that mean? Well, first of all, our Appropriations Committee has met the test of the Constitution. The Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution directs that there be an Appropriations Committee, though it's not referred to by name, but that it be every year that we review the annual spending of the federal government and vote upon it. We also follow the law, and by following the law is the Bipartisan Budget Act forged by the chairpeople of Ryan and Murray. We meet the requirements of the Budget Control Act. Now, the Budget Control Act looks at total spending for the federal government, mandatory spending and then discretionary spending. We who are appropriators handle all of the accounts for discretionary spending. And guess what? The Budget Committee puts a cap on us. And that's great. It's a way that we actually have a cap on spending that everybody knows and everybody voted for. So we have a cap by law on discretionary spending of $1.012 trillion for fiscal 2014. Our work of our 12 committees stayed within that cap, and yet we spent the money to meet certain areas. We met compelling human need. We certainly preserved national security. We looked out for our human capital, particularly our children, in terms of education, and also invested in physical capital, improving infrastructure, and also the long-range needs of our country by putting public investments into important research and development, like $1 billion more in NIH. We also met the mandate of the American people, who told us work together, be bipartisan, work across the aisle and work across the dome. And you know what? We did it. And they also said when the bill comes up, don't do it with brinkmanship and don't do it with showmanship. Get the job done in a common sense way that promotes growth in our country, but yet at the same time looks at reducing debt. They said, don't do showdown politics, and we won't. We will pass it because we've met our deadline. They said, don't put government on autopilot with something called those continuing funding resolutions. We don't do that either. Every one of our 12 subcommittees are in this comprehensive bill. Now, we've dealt with difficult and divisive policy issues, but we did it with diligence and determination, and I must add, we've tried to promote an atmosphere of civility as we did it. It was tense, you betcha, and it was intense. But at the end of the day, we did more pinpointing of how to do the job than finger-pointing at each other. Negotiations were, as I said, conducted that way. Our House Appropriations Committee Chairman, Mr. Hal Rogers, the gentleman from Kentucky, and I forged this agreement, along with ranking members, my Vice Chairman, Senator Shelby of Alabama, and in the House, Congresswoman Lowy of New York. We didn't do it alone. There was bipartisan agreement of all the subcommittee chairs and over 50 members of the House and Senate. We met a very stringent deadline. When we left here on December 20th, we had to produce a bill by January 15th. That's tomorrow. That's when the continuing resolution expires. We're asking for a 72-hour extension, not to finish the job, but so that we can do our deliberations on the floor in both the House and in the Senate. We worked day and night. I joked and said during the deliberations, I wish I was as thin as I am stretched, because we really worked at it. Over the holidays, our staffs and our subcommittee chairmen worked. The only time they took off was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And also, so we want to thank each and every one of them for their dedication. As I said, this bill required very difficult choices. It meant give and take. And it meant more giving on both sides, because there were no big tanks. We worked under a very tight budget, $1 trillion. It sounds like a lot of money. And you know what? It is. But of the trillion, $600 billion was in the Department of Defense. $600 billion was in DOD. The other $3 billion was in discretionary spending for all of the domestic agencies. And then it comes out to like 620 and 380, but those are the rough numbers. So we did meet our national security needs, but we also were very mindful, and I was particularly mindful of the social contract with the American people. I wanted to have a bill that helped create jobs in this country, not make work, but real work, in rebuilding our physical infrastructure on roads and bridges and clean water. And I also wanted to look ahead to the long-range needs of our country in research and discoveries, and not only win the Nobel Prizes, but to win the markets. We expanded our commercial service office to help us promote exports overseas, accelerated manufacturing institutes where government could work with this new emerging dynamic small-scale manufacturing. I've lost over 12% of manufacturing in my state. So manufacturing is important. And we wanted to make sure that families felt they had a government that was on their side. First of all, helping with school safety. And we have a bipartisan program in here to promote school safety, but at the same time to promote quality child care and early childhood education. We then made those kinds of investments, all with an eye on getting value for taxpayers. Our colleagues are very clear, and so are the American people. We have to have a more frugal line, and I instructed my colleagues on the Senate side, let's look at those programs that are dated, duplicative, or dysfunctional. They get a D. Dated, duplicative, and dysfunctional. And we were able to eliminate many of them, and we'll be back at it next year doing a scrub. And if you notice, there's been no atmosphere of crisis. No atmosphere of crisis. The other thing that I'm proud of in this bill is that we avoided contentious policy riders. And I think we've been able to deal with those in a way where they will not be a problem for either side of the aisle. However, there was one wrong or one technical mistake in the Budget Committee that I'm proud that we were able to do. This was really at the very top of our agenda when Mr. Rogers and I met. We were deeply concerned about the cost of living issue related to military retirees of working age who were disabled or survivors. Their COLAs were mistakenly reduced by 1% in the recent budget agreement. This bill, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, fixes that problem. It is limited in scope. It's limited to disabled military retirees and survivors of departed service members, the neediest of the needy. And we hope as time moves on, there is a presidential and a DOD commission on pension reform at DOD, and we'll have a comprehensive approach, and I do it. But I also want my colleagues to know we were very mindful of these veterans. So we did this fix for the military retirees of working age who are disabled or the survivors of departed service members. But we also did something else. If you go to the website in the House, which has the most detail because it's pending there, it'll come up in the Senate when it moves here tomorrow. We really put money into veterans' health care. We put money into fixing the veterans' disability backlog. I know the gentlelady from Massachusetts believes that if you're on the front line, you shouldn't have to wait to the back of the line to get, if you're a wounded warrior, to get your disability benefits determined. So we've pushed for those reforms, and we put the taxpayers' dollars behind it because we knew that's the way they would want us to spend their money. And we've also maintained the veterans' education benefit because many of our young men and women coming back home who served so well over there need to brush up on education here to move them to jobs here. So I hope in voting for this bill, people realize that it's a vote to support our most vulnerable patriots, to make sure we keep our promises to our veterans, and that we also then look at this comprehensive bill that we have moved ahead without rancor, without roar, and we've tried to, and we stayed within the parameters, the budget parameters given to us on a bipartisan agreement. So the House will consider this agreement this week. They've sent us over a 3-day extension so we could complete our work. I hope we pass it. I'd like it to pass tonight or certainly tomorrow. We'll be on the floor for ample debate on this bill, and I will look forward to answering questions. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, in this institution, often more gets said than done. But you know what? We did get it done, and I will have more to say about it when the bill comes to the floor. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. I see my colleagues from Minnesota and South Dakota on the floor. I know that they want to enter into a colloquy, but they've been gracious to allow me 1 minute on a separate subject, which is flood insurance, and I thank them so much. I want to, before I start, just congratulate the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who not only understands the issues in a major piece of legislation, from science to space to technology to defense to homeland security to education, and really keeps so much of that in her mind and her heart. But she also, as we can just see, can explain this important bill to us in a way that everyone can understand it. And the senator from Maryland is just truly a champion and a treasure in the Senate. And I want to, before she leaves the floor, just acknowledge her extraordinary leadership, because it's a very tough time to find common ground, but she's found it with her Republican colleagues. And I just hope that we can get this bill through the floor of the Senate the next 2 days or 3. Madam Chair, let me just say for one moment, please, how important it is to not only pass this extraordinary appropriation bill, which many of us have been working on for over a year, literally, in public hearings, in meetings, negotiating with our Republican colleagues, and just, of course, in the last month, these high-level negotiations have been going on, and we hope to be on that bill sometime tomorrow. Leader Reid has expressed that we won't be leaving for the break next week without getting that work done, so I'm prepared, and all of us are here to handle that business. But there's another piece of legislation that, Madam President, you particularly have been a co-sponsor. Senator Hoeven, who's on the floor, has been an extraordinary leader, and that is to fix our well-intended but disastrous flood insurance program that we refer to as Biggert Waters, which was passed about 1.5 years ago, as I said, with very good intention. But it has had disastrous consequences in Massachusetts, in South Dakota, in Louisiana, in Texas, in Montana, Pennsylvania. This is not a coastal issue. This is an issue that affects millions of Americans owning their own homes, their primary homes, and business owners, middle class, solidly middle class, people that don't live anywhere near a beach, and people who literally have never flooded, their homes have never flooded, have found themselves, because of the unintended consequences of this well-intentioned law, in a terrible circumstance that they may actually lose their home and lose their business. And we can fix that. And the great news is we have a bill that is being led by Senator Menendez from New Jersey and Senator Isaacson from Georgia. It is truly bipartisan. We have almost 30 co-sponsors in the Senate. So while it's been difficult to kind of find common ground, we've worked very hard to find it. And I'm here on the floor to say that, to our knowledge, we have pretty much worked out most of the objections on all sides. We think that there might be amendments that want to be offered by Senator Toomey, Senator Colburn, Senator Crapo. On our side, Senator Hagan, Senator Merkley. We're working through that now. Senator Blunt's amendment, we believe, could be incorporated into the bill. Senator Tester's amendment can be incorporated into the base of the bill with no harm to the underlying balance of the bill. And so I just came to the floor to say to everyone, we're really making progress. And if we could work on these few amendments just in the next hour or two, the leaders might be able to come and ask unanimous consent for us to get on this bill in the morning and actually finish it before we go on appropriations. So if everyone would cooperate just a little bit more on this, we could have several amendments, limit the time to, let's say, 30-minute debate on each amendment. We'd end up with about 6 or so amendments. We could fit it into tomorrow morning's work period. That is my hope. If we don't, then we're going to have to stay here, I think, even after the appropriations bill and get this, because I don't know about you, Madam Chair, but I can't go home to I just cannot go home again without getting this fixed. And we have been now working on this patiently. We have had hearings, we've had meetings, we've had press conferences. We have a coalition of over 200 organizations. We've worked with the House in strong partnership with the House. They will be ready to act when they get back on our bill, and if we can get a strong vote of, let's say, 70 senators, which we're hoping for, maybe more, that will send a very strong signal to the House of Representatives. This bill has no score, a zero cost to this bill, zero. It doesn't repeal Biggert Waters. It postpones it until we can fix it and gives us the impetus to fix it. So I don't want to take any more time. I thank my colleagues. But let's work hard in the next hour or so. And I really want to thank Senator Isakson for working so hard, the senator from Georgia, to try to clear the objections that are on his side, and Senator Menendez and his staff for working on our side. And I yield the floor.
Senator from South Dakota. North Dakota. I apologize.
I want to thank the gentlelady from Louisiana for her work on the flood insurance bill, and I'm pleased to join her in that effort. It is very important. I hope we do have opportunity to address that this week, and we'll continue to do all we can to help in that endeavor. But again, thank you for all your work on that very important legislation. Also would like to thank the gentlewoman from Minnesota for joining me this afternoon. We are today introducing the Driver Privacy Act, and I'm very pleased to sponsor that legislation with the good senator from Minnesota. We have a great group that's joined us as we introduce this bill today. This is all about protecting people's privacy in regard to their automobile. Every automobile that will be made going forward, over 90%, something like 96% of the automobiles that are made now have a black box in them. This actually is silver, but we call it a black box because it's an event data recorder. And it records information about your automobile. 96%, I think, of automobiles being made now have them, but the U.S. Department of Transportation is requiring this year that every vehicle have an event data recorder in it. And the senator from Minnesota and I believe that that should be the owner's information, and that information should not be released without the owner's consent. And we already have a good group that have joined us in the endeavor, including an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. Senator Joe Hans from Nebraska, Senator Angus King from Maine, Senator Kirk from Illinois, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Senator Saxby Chambliss from Georgia, Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado, Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri, Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii, Senator Johnny Isakson from Georgia, Senator Mark Begich of Alaska, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. So you can see a great group, absolutely bipartisan, equal number of Republicans and Democrats from across the United States have joined together here, recognizing that people are concerned about their privacy, and we need to make sure that their privacy is protected. So I'd like to make a few introductory comments here with the help of these charts, and then turn to my colleague from Minnesota for her comments as well. You know, we've seen with the NSA, with the IRS, with the Affordable Care Act, with a whole range of issues that people feel that with what's going on, not only in government, but with technology, that their privacy is at risk these days, and it's very much a concern. And many people don't realize that this event data recorder is in their car. It records all kinds of information about the car, and in fact, the federal government is requiring that this device be in their car, and that neither is there a limitation on the amount of data that device can record, nor is there a law that protects individuals' privacy, makes sure that the owner of the car decides who gets that information, other than under very specific circumstances which I'll take a minute here just to go through. So what kind of data gets recorded by your event data recorder, or this black box that's included in your car? Well, there's more than 45 different data points that are in fact recorded right now. And again, the manufacturer can change this, add to it. There's no limitation or restriction or guidelines or requirements on what manufacturers can have the event data recorder do. So right now, it records things like speed, braking, engine, seatbelt usage, driver information, passenger information, steering, airbags, crash details. And as I say, at this point, the manufacturer determines what goes into that black box in terms of what its capabilities are. And just to give you a sense, if you delve further in there, for example, you know, engine. I just picked one here, engine. Number of times the engine was started since being manufactured prior to a crash. Obviously, the idea here with the event data recorder is that it provides information, just like an event data recorder on an airplane. In the event of a crash, it provides information about the accident. But it's recording this information in a loop on a continuous basis, and then retains it for a short period of time, but constantly updates it. So, for example, for your engine, it can record the number of times the engine was started since being manufactured prior to a crash, number of times the engine was started since being manufactured prior to the EDR data download that's taken in case the box is removed and the information taken and there isn't a crash. How fast was the engine running? So that's just one of the 45 data points, but the kind of information that is recorded and can be extracted from the black box. So what does our legislation do? It's very simple, very straightforward. The Driver Privacy Act provides that the data from your EDR in your car cannot be extracted or taken by another party other than under very specific circumstances. And that means it can't be done without your consent unless it's authorized by a court of law, or the information is retrieved pursuant to a NHTSA, which is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration recall, or the information is needed in the event of a medical emergency. So essentially, unless there's some kind of recall in the car, and then they can't disclose any data about you as an individual, it's macro data, all right? But that limitation, other than that, without your consent, that information can only be taken from you by a court of law or in the event of a medical emergency. And that's done, obviously, for the very reason that you have the black box in the car, safety, right? I mean, law enforcement would be who might be getting it pursuant to a court order. But they can't just take it. They have to have a court order. Medical emergency, you know, if you're in a car accident, they need that information because of a medical emergency, then there's special condition to take it. And in developing these, we were very careful to work both with the organizations that advocate privacy, but also the automobile dealers, also the insurance industry, also law enforcement. So we consulted with stakeholders like the Electronic Privacy Information Center, with Heritage, with AAA, with the Auto Alliance, with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Again, making sure that the law enforcement issues were covered as well as the ACLU. So we've got a broad and diverse group that have been consulted and that we've worked with in putting together this information. 14 states have their own laws on this issue. And so here I've highlighted the 14 different states that have passed laws that in fact assure you that this information is your information and cannot be taken from you without your consent other than court order or medical emergency. But when you leave your state and you're driving in another state, you're no longer protected. So even though 14 states have stepped up and said, yeah, this is something we need to do. In fact, it was something we did when I was governor in my state. That's 14 states. In the other states, not only are they not protected, but you're not protected either when you drive outside your state, which obviously all of us do on many, many occasions. And that's why we need a federal law. And the reality is this technology is just evolving and developing. This technology is going to continue to develop with all kinds of other aspects, including obviously now GPS and all the different things that are being done with automobiles, in many cases things that people want. But they need to know that their privacy is protected. And that's what we're doing here. And we're doing it in a way that we make sure that we continue to assure law enforcement and first responders, manufacturers, that the safety issues are being dealt with, but at the same time assuring the American citizens, the consumers, that their privacy rights are being respected and protected as required under the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution. With that, I'd like to turn to my esteemed colleague from Minnesota and again thank her for the work of her staff, as well as the work she's done on this bill. With her background in law enforcement, she truly understands the issues and has been invaluable in putting together this legislation. And so, again, I'd like to thank her and ask her for her comments.
Madam
Senator from
President.
Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm introducing this bill today with Senator Hoeven, who's been a true leader on this issue way back to his time as a governor when he worked to pass